Chapter 2. The Filth. Now, some subtle changes to this tale must be made. While the world of mice is intriguing, it is also very alien. Until now, the tale has been crafted to illustrate their perception of the world, while also adhering to the common measurement of time. However, a good tale must be relatable, both to the reader and the world it takes place in. Without some necessary alterations, things shall become confusing and muddled. There will be parts of the underlands that could not be described, as much of it is shrouded in the shadows of the earth. The pacing of events would also be too swift, as mice live very short lives. Thus, this tale shall now introduce more human elements and the perception of time adjusted. Clever minds will know where imagination ends and begins. Only half an hour had passed since Fetcher's encounter with the starving. He was very eager to get back to his nest and escape the deathly fringe tunnels. Between being chased by Tabby and threatened by Starver, he was done with adventures for the drift. His only thoughts were to turn the button over to Barter to receive the grain he and Silence would need for the calf. With a descending trill, Fetcher slowed his gait as his whiskers twitched to the colder air near the tunnel's exit. A beckoning faint grey glimmer grew in the distance before him. His eyes adjusted as he slipped from the black and entered a large cavern. The roof of the cavern was speckled with bits of glow moss, twinkling like stars that clung to the earth, stone and root along the top of the cavern. Before Fetcher was the trail down into the valley where the filth rested. This was one of several vast regions of the Underlands that had been carved by water many lifetimes ago, long before even the oldest ancestors of the mice and rats that now dwelt within. The lore masters say that it was once used by the colossal folk when they lived underground much like beasts. Then the great world shift happened and everything changed. There were still some ruins left behind that hinted at this truth, which the mice now made use of. The land was bordered by the River of Stench, a slow-moving, murky stream that emitted a foul odour. The river was a vital source of water, but it also carried waste and refuse from the surface. The soil was rich and dark, perfect for growing fungi and moss. The air was damp and heavy with a musky scent. The glow of moss and fungi provide the only light, casting an eerie grey glow over everything. Every inch or so, a root jutted out of the ground. There was a time each had glowing root fire that better lit the path, carefully tended by denizens of the burrow for generations. However, the starving had devoured all the bitter moss despite the pain it caused. Now, all were bare and broken, as their care had been abandoned for many spans. He was not troubled by this, as the starry glow moss provided ample light, and his whiskers never failed him. He sped faster down the path as the brass button parched his tongue. In the distance to the east, a large, strange-looking object sat on a slight rise of land. It was a circular mass of metal, well rusted by time, and covered in various subterranean plants. It had a large hole on one side, like a gaping mouth, where the river flowed through as well as around the great object. Fetcher had never been able to approach it very closely, as it was far from the safety of the burrow. To travel there would require crossing a large section of bare soil, being fully exposed to various predators that lurked in nests hidden in the shadows. The metal mass had been a part of the landscape for as long as anyone could remember, but its origin was unknown. As Fetcher descended, the outer walls loomed larger in his sight. Made from pebbles and dried clay, the wall wrapped in a circle around the burrow for a total length nearing 50 feet. The wall's base was nearly 5 feet high and 8 inches thick, with a tapering outward overhang extending at a 45-degree angle. What's more, fragments of broken beetle shells and bone spikes jutted out all over the surface. The jagged shells discouraged climbing, and the spikes would impale any foolish enough to attempt jumping. It was a labour that took nearly 2 spans to construct. Before the burrow had been founded, the mice had no choice but to risk the dangers of the Skylands to scavenge. That all changed as the mice began to settle the cavern and cultivate their own food. At first, it had been a blessing. No longer did they need to put their lives on the line to steal from the colossal folk, as they had become mostly self-sustaining. However, there were those that did not want to change their ways, and discovered it was now far easier to take from their fellow mice than the giants above. Thus began the War of Hoarding. It started with theft and hoarding of the moss, mushcap, and rootling crops by the more ambitious mice. Then cattle were stolen from the fly, worm, and beetle ranches. This led to large raiding parties and fighting. Mice began to slay other mice, with those that survived retreating to the darkest corners of the cavern and fringes. As the spans went by, they grew more feral and vicious. This was only the beginning, and resources continued to grow scarcer. Growers and herders, tired of their losses, gave up and turned to first thievery and then murder. This hastened the burrow's decay. Some returned to the old ways of stealing from the Skylands, but many had grown accustomed to life fully underground and lacked the courage to go up. When there was no food left to steal, they began to cannibalize each other as their hunger pangs drove them to madness. Yet there were those that did not want to give up on the burrow, and so plans were made. A wall would be erected in response to the growing threat of the starving, as they were now called. At first, progress was impossible due to the frequent attacks, but then the rats came. Many would look back on the treaty that was formed as a cat's deal, but there was no choice in the matter. The rats' raw power and divine favor were needed to contend with the starving's higher numbers. The battles were endless. The rats fought fang and claw with the starving as the Wallfathers desperately built. There were many setbacks as drifts turned to calves, calves to depths, and then depths to spans. The soil grew acrid with the stench of blood, but the rats reveled in the chaos. It seemed as if with every rat that fell, their surviving comrades grew in strength nigh tenfold, and their plague-ridden bites left their victims writhing in agony. Little by little, the wall slowly enveloped the burrow with its protective barrier. When the gate was shut for the first time, it was a great relief for all within. At last, they could finally rest in peace as the starving flung and skewered themselves hopelessly in their madness against the bony spikes. The burrow was saved, at least for a time, and the mice had hope once more for its enduring future. But the rat folk's control was also established. Fetcher didn't pause to take in the sight. Though it had been long before his time, he knew the story well, as he had lived in the burrow for over 50 spans. Along the top of the wall was a platform on which several mice could move about, watching for danger. He could make out a few mice patrolling the top as he closed the distance, their silhouettes illuminated by the glow moss that also grew atop the walls. But he did come to a pause when he reached the gate and was surprised to see a mouse standing guard. "Hold you! Speak your errand!" the young mouse cried out as he lunged forward with his tail raised up. The mouse was much younger and slightly bigger, but looked absurd with the oversized beetle shell helmet balanced precariously on his head. It wobbled back and forth and looked like it would tip over at any moment. His dirty white fur puffed about his frame and seemed to stir up a cloud of dust with the faintest movement. He had to awkwardly take a moment to push the helmet up as it fell in before his dark grey eyes. Fetcher spat the button into his right paw as he reared back to sit on his haunches. He gave his fellow mouse a confused look as he worked his tongue to salivate and stave off the dryness. "What mean you by, 'speak your errand'?" "I be a fetcher, plain as drift. Hold now. Friend Digger, be that you?" Digger, still having trouble with his helmet, pulled it off in frustration, then looked to Fetcher and sniffed the air. "Oh ho, friend Fetcher, It is you true. You been gone for nigh a depth long. Woe in the Skylands, yes? More than I bartered, and age deals me no kindness, Fetcher answered, with a high, cynical chirp. He then looked Digger over. But what be all this folly, friend Digger? He gestures to the discarded shell helm and the gate. Or should I name you friend guard now? Digger shook his head. No, no, not so full. This be but fleeting while the rats make merry. Making merry? Fetcher tilted his head confused. What make they merry for? Oh, yes, you were far away. They warded off a starving assault the other drift. Digger gestured past Fetcher to the valley lands outside the walls. Must have been 50 of 'em. They were wroth, I swear you. They ate full some of the growers and herders, ravaged all the wrought wood, patches and dung piles, and devoured nearly all cattle that couldn't escape. No moss or shroom shall we see for a goodly while now, and our store of eggs and maggots have suffered. He shuddered as he recalled the attack. Some charged into the burrow before the rats barred the gate. They took Crafter. He be gone. Nigh his apprentice too, ere the rats slew the starving. That be why I stand here. They feast on the fallen, and hold a merry old tide. Crafter be dead? Fetcher balked, then glanced down to his button. Yet he it was that bade Barter to have buttons be fetched. Aye, Barter saw wrath o'er that. Most of the fetchers came back afore the onslaught, and gave o'er their buttons. Now Barter has a heap of buttons, and none to craft 'em. Foul fate for you, friend Fetcher. You shall toil to win your pay for yourself. Digger gave Fetcher a pitying look. His eyes glanced down to the button, then he canted his head and pawed forward to get a closer look. Hold now. That be a shine? Fetcher nodded in response. Yes, certainly. I bore a fearful time fleeing with it. My maw fell wide when I spied it lying above. I've heard tales of shines found in the Skylands, high o'er the deep realms of the noble folk, but this be the first I've beheld in all my drifts. He then raised the button up and held it with both paws to show Digger. Unlike the common buttons of bone and wood wrapped in cloth, this button had a nude grey shimmer. Digger gave a high squeak of surprise as he looked it over. That might shift your lot, friend Fetcher, but raise not your hopes overmuch. Shaping shines be sure a crafter's work, and we've none now. I hear apprentice scarce learned half the skill. Word whisper he means to depart anon to end his learning in Crystal Granborough. That be the nearest stead with a crafter of their own, so I've heard tell. I best not tarry then. My missus has waited overlong, and it seems I have some haggling to do. Fetcher looked past Digger, remembered his earlier encounter. Keep your guard keen, friend Digger. I faced a starver in the tunnels afore. I came through safe, but there was a frenzy. Their defeat by the rats may not have greatly diminished their number. And always more, Digger shuddered, casting a wary look up the trail. I be no true guard, friend Fetcher. I'll give a warning, but I shall flee swift in a heartbeat at danger. This be rat work. If you could do me a kindness and bear this warning to Captain, I'd thank you well. Now, Fetcher shuddered as his thoughts of rats were all grim. Like most mice, he suffered them only for their might and God. So be it. I shall bear your words. Where be him? He yet hosts a wild revel in the temple of Rattidy. Venture not within those halls, but remain without, friend Fetcher. Digger shook his head, quaking. Their bloodlust lingers yet. You will not come out alive, nay, not whole elsewise. Thank you for the forewarning. Fetcher's tired grey eyes glanced to the button in his paw. I need take this shine to Barter first, and hope for good fortune. I'll not bear such a prize afore the rats. Nor afore any, friend Fetcher. In these days even your kin may not be trusted to deal fair. Digger cast a fearful glance at the brass button, then held up a claw, half a beat. The chubby mouse pawed back to the gate and poked his head round the corner. He came back holding a bag woven from moss strands and root fibres in his teeth. "Para-pow," he mumbled with full mouth before setting it down. "You can use this. I already had lunch and shan't need it till the post drift." "I thank you right heartily, friend Digger." Fetcher bowed his head in thanks, then slipped the button into the sack. "I had fretted over that. Ne'er thought I'd find a shine on my fetching afore I parted. This shall ward off envious eyes. You have my gratitude." "Think naught of it, friend Fetcher," Digger chirped warmly, then returned to his post at the gate, fussing with his oversized helm to balance it again. "Take care for yourself now. Hie you to Silence as swift as you can. She's, well, yet as you left her." Fetcher took the meaning without further explanation, picked up the sack with his teeth, and bound through the gate and into the filth. The burrow sprawled with dirt nests tucked beneath roots and stone as a tangle of burrows and crevices hollowed in the cavern floor. Some were shored with dried clay, but most demanded endless toil to keep from crumbling. The burrow held little beyond these, save a shattered barrel piece, its splintered curve a rough haven where denizens gathered. There were no stalls, halls, or other niceties, a lesser place of filth for rodents to rest, with slightly less dread of teeth tearing into their throats. Fetcher marked an unusual stir. Many shifted their noses in the air, whiskers twitching, as eyes of various shades of grey peered to the south and upwards. The surviving herders rested next to their wingless flies, pondering the risks of taking their cattle to the dung heaps beyond the wall. The growers of moss and mushrooms stood empty-pawed, their haunts plundered, with naught to eat or trade. All that had lost depths of labour were forced to ponder whether they must now dare the Skyland's dangers. Many lingered under the barrel, sniffing the quarter groats in their paws, torn on spending their last for nectar to ease their woes. The rest were either within, chirping in mournful mirth, or without, begging for scraps. Fetcher spotted one soul curled in a nest, a wild glint in his eyes, as he gnawed his fur in frantic fits, whiskers quivering as his gaze drifted to his own tail. Fetcher darted past the sight. He had no wish to see an idiom become a stark reality. Just a few inches more and he stood before a dirt mound. Barter's nest, larger than most, serving as both home and trade den. He pushed back the woven moss covering and slipped within. Fetcher found himself in a small bare hollow, just large enough for 2 mice to rest apart or 5 to 6 cramped together. This was not so strange, as mice oft slept in tight nests with little more than dried leaves, grass, feathers, or the like to keep warm. What was strange was the portal nestled snugly in the wall on the opposite side. It was a strip of bark gnawed in the shape of a rectangle, but topped with a half circle. Fetcher had ever been curious of this barrier and what lay past it. As a Fetcher, he had seen similar portals in the Skylands, towering yet movable barriers the colossal folk used with ease. Most he could squeeze beneath through gaps at the base, but the one in Barter's nest was the only one in the Underlands he had ever found. Mouse-sized, it could not be slipped under, and he had yet to fathom how Barter passed it. Fetcher padded forward and scrabbled at the barrier, making sure not to sink his claws in. He had made this mistake before, was made to regret it, and swiftly learned not to repeat his error. He then padded back to wait. He heard some odd sounds and skittering behind the portal before a familiar, though muffled voice called out from within. "Who be it?" "Fetcher," he spoke up after setting the sack down, with a "Go away!" the irked voice commanded before Fetcher could finish. "I have more buttons than I wot what to do with. You'll get no grain from me. Off with you now." Half a beat! Fetcher lunged for the portal and scrabbled on it fiercely with his claws. It be no ordinary button. A button be a button, the voice answered. If crafter yet lived, I'd have use for them. But he be dead, and apprentice a half-wit. Now cease your troubling of me. I've already given a depth's worth of my grain for naught, and I be not in a fair mood for it. Off with you now. Shine! Fetcher now clawed at the barrier. It be a shine! The tone of the voice swiftly changed, and there came a sound of one hastening to the barrier on the other side. Hark! What? Did I hear you aright? Yeah! Fetcher gave a sigh of relief. You heard aright, Barter. It be a shine. Cease your shouting, fool! Would you have the whole borough know? Step back from the... Fetcher did as he was bidden and moved back behind the sack he had set down. He tilted his head, hoping to catch a peek past the barrier as it opened. As ever, he saw nothing, for the other mouse was swift to slip out and swing the portal shut behind, yet several curious scents kissed Fetcher's nostrils. Some he dimly knew and was certain came from the Skylands, but others he could not place. A ghost of the scents only lingered in the air as they clung to the nest's occupant, Barter, as he set himself before the barrier. On his haunches, he was bigger than Fetcher, as well as somewhat fatter and healthier. His fur was white, brighter than most mice of like hue, for he was ever well groomed. He had large, dark yet bright grey eyes, and they fixed upon Fetcher. What do you tarry for? Where be it? Fetcher jumped slightly and fumbled to open the sack. Despite both mice being old, his whiskers quivered at the other's sage-like presence. He slipped the button from the sack and held it for Barter's inspection. Here, see? It'd be hard to mark down here, but it gleamed a true shine in the lights above. And it has not the taste of bone nor branch. So it be, Barter spoke straightway, snatching the button from the other's paws without waiting for consent to look it over. The alone makes that plain, even in the dim moss glow. Fetcher was annoyed at his find being taken without courtesy, but forgot as Barter began to mumble to himself using odd words as he continued to inspect and even taste the button. At least, Fetcher thought they were words. He could never be sure. Barter used them at times to describe or name things he alone seemed to see and understand. After a run had passed, Fetcher gave a low, inquisitive chirp. Well, be you interested? Barter looked up with a mingle of annoyance, along with his usual grumpiness. He took a long look at the button, then sighed. Much as I loathe to say it, yea, I be. I can do naught with it now, thanks to what befell, but I cannot bring myself to let it pass. 'Tis rare enough. What be your price? Well, a calf's grain, as you did swear, Fetcher chirped happily. Barter moaned a descending trill. That offer was for far more than one button, but his bright eyes lingered over the shine in his paws. So be it, a calf worth it shall be. Bide where you are, away from the... Barter set the button down, then turned, his bulk blocking the barrier from Fetcher's sight. He did something with his paws, and the barrier swung open again. He slipped inside and slammed it before Fetcher could try for another peek. Fetcher waited, whiskers twitching with unease. Though he knew not the word Barter had used, Fetcher had learned through repetition that it meant the portal. Though unable to see what transpired on the other side, he heard the faint sounds of scampering. Despite having grown accustomed to the other mouse's queer ways over the spans, he ever found himself yearning to know what lay beyond that carved piece of bark. The barrier at last popped open, and Barter emerged with a small bundle hanging from his maw. It was a pack of groats, more than a half-inch tall, bound tight by thread. He set it on the ground. There you have it, 35 whole grains. Fetcher did not undo the thread, but ran his claw down the side of the stack to count. As he did so, He noticed Barter's whiskers lift as he almost smiled, a rare ease in his countenance. "What?" Fetcher asked at the change in the other's demeanour. "You be one of the few that seem to have truly heeded my teachings when I cared enow to try, counting and numbers at the least. Most fetchers but snatch and flee as soon as they gain their grain." Barter spoke wistfully. "It be good to know mine efforts to lift the minds of this borough were not wholly for naught." "Well, those were good teachings," Fetcher chirped as he slipped the grain pack into Digger's sack. "I saw little worth in learning your scribbles, but the numbers have been most helpful in reckoning grain and other things." "Better than naught, I ween," Barter chirped warmly, though with some return of his usual sour mood. "Now off with you," he bade softly as he snatched up the button with his teeth. With no further words, he slipped through the portal and was gone. Fetcher regarded the portal a moment, then turned to exit and scampered to his nest. Thankfully, the way was short and he met no other mice, glad of it. After passing several other nests, he came to a halt before his. Visually, it was little different from the others, just another hovel of dirt and clay. It was the unique sense that allowed the mouse to recognize his home from all the others. Fetcher made his way inside and looked about. His nest was likely the smallest in all the burrow, though it was large enough to house 8 mice comfortably. The interior was woven of dried grass and leaves with a cocoon-like shape, padded with scraps of glow moss and clumps of shed fur, softening the walls where root threads dangled like frayed veins. The walls curved inward, braced by a few sturdy twigs Fetcher had wedged long ago, their ends chewed to fit. Faint flecks of glow moss clung to the ceiling, casting a dim shimmer over scratch marks, his way of marking the passage of time. Near the back, a nook of smoothed clay cradled his hoard of various odds and ends he had gathered in his travels. It mostly consisted of beetle shells and other insect carapaces, torn bits of fabric and threads, pebbles both smooth and rough, and a club made from a sturdy twig with bone fragments fastened to the tip with spider webbing. Next to the nook was a long feather from a skyland fowl he had found on one of his recent trips, pinned by his lucky bone splinter. Lastly, nestled in the nook, his family heirloom, the trusty sewing needle rapier, with a button handguard of bone and clay hilt that yet gleamed in the light. Then to the right, a narrow tunnel, just 2 inches wide, snaked off to the sleeping hollow. Next to it, a small dry hollow in the ground with a bit of bark over the top to serve as a cover, rested in one corner beside a scatter of dried maggot husks that had been picked clean. He moved over to the food nook, whiskers drooping at its contents, after lifting the bark, a very tiny heap of groats, just enough for a drift. He opened the sack and placed the stack of groats to join the rest. Taking one groat in his teeth before closing the hatch, he made his way down the tunnel and found his wife, Silence, where she always rested. "I be returned," he greeted her warmly. Silence, a dark grey mouse with dull light grey eyes, lay curled up within a hollow root in a bed made of torn bits of various fabrics. Her back had been to him, but she had rolled over at her husband's scent. Her eyes looked up to acknowledge his presence, whiskers easing in relief at his return. She got up and nuzzled her head against his, but she spoke no words of greeting. Fetcher returned the gesture with his own, savouring the feel and scent of his most trusted companion. "I gained my share of grain despite all that befell. We shall need to be wary, though. There will be desperate mice in the burrow after the starving onslaught." If Silence had known of the event, she expressed nothing in her bearing to show it, nor surprise, for that matter. She took the offered groat, nibbled it into 2 halves, and gave one to her husband. Fetcher took the offered morsel and ate quietly with his wife, His payment would have been abundant for a lone mouse to feed off for a calf, but 2 mice would need careful rationing. He relayed the tale of his recent journey as they ate, going into detail about what had happened and why he had been delayed. He also shared the news from the gate, as well as his personal thoughts of the burro's state. Times will be hard. Many of the growers and herders must needs become fetchers. Those too afeard may lurk in the tunnels, hoping to catch a fetcher off his guard. I think I shall bear my sword henceforth. Fetcher spoke, his gaze turning to his mate. Silence's whiskers quivered with unease, and she pressed closer to her husband. Fetcher returned her affection with his own nuzzle. I shall be well enow. I have been at it for nigh 40 spans after all. I may not be strong enow to face a rat, but a wild mouse be naught to fear, he assured her with sincere confidence. It be our good folk that will try to venture forth that I fear for. They be not skilled in navigating the skylands, so many will like as not end up. Fetcher caught himself before he finished. His whiskers drooped, a heavy stillness about him as he glanced round their nest, now empty of what once was. Silence rested her head against him, seeking warmth and protection from hard memories as she shuddered. The faint glow of the moss above cast a gentle light upon their fur, illuminating the comforting entwining of their tails. Fetcher yearned to remain by his wife's side, but then he recalled his earlier vow. I must go on an errand, just a swift one, he added after seeing his wife's troubled look. I'll not leave the burrow. I need but bear my tale to Captain as friend Digger asked. This did not comfort Silence, and her ears flattened at the rat's name. She said nothing, but her grim expression told more than enough. Her body leaned toward his, her weight shifting in his direction, as if to prevent him from leaving her side. I'll not tarry long, I swear it. Fetcher leaned over to nuzzle her, then rose up on his paws. He was soon back outside and running as he made his way to the temple that rested at the center of the burrow. The temple was more than a nest of dirt and clay, by far the largest. It sprawled across a third of the burrow and rose nearly 3 feet, a maze of short tunnels linking a network of halls and hollows where the rats worshipped, dwelt, and rested between their guard of the filth. There were numerous ways in, but mice were permitted only the front entrance, a wide tunnel leading to the main hall where the rats worshipped the ratted of plague and gathered in fierce revelry. Fetcher eyed the entrance with apprehension. The musky scent of rat wafted from the dark moor, mingling with the odours of the burrow in a nauseating melange. He could hear the ruckus of their revelry from outside, and so knew their bloodlust had not waned. There were no guards at the entrance, as none of the other denizens would dare to enter at this time. The rats could be reasonable, but they were best avoided after a battle. Still, Fetcher had made a promise to a friend and would keep it. Steeling himself and crawling up as close to the moor that his courage would allow, he raised his voice and called out, Ho! Tidings from without for Captain! There was a brief lull in the temple. Then a hovering set of gleaming eyes and fangs appeared at the entrance and glided forth. This must be of grand importance, yes, growled a deep voice from the void of darkness. Only after the mass emerged into the dim glow did the faint outline of the rat appear. His fur was so black that pure shadow garbed his essence, and his eyes were such a dark grey that he seemed to have giant pupils. Captain then reared up on his haunches, measuring a daunting foot in length without counting his tail. We have earned for us a fair repose for our blood so spilt by faith. Fetcher flinched but knew it best to relay the message swiftly before he lost his nerve. He lowered his eyes to avoid Captain's gaze. I returned to the burrow a few gnaws agone from the Skylands. I was beset by the starving in the fringes. What of that, mouse? The rat spat. There be ever starving in those tunnels, yes. he reminded with an annoyed growl. Yea. Fetcher paused a moment as he chose his words carefully, but they fell into a frenzy, and this was after the onslaught on the burrow, as I reckon the timing. That be not the norm. I have navigated the tunnels for many spans during times of both plenty and want. Never before have the starving been active so swiftly after a defeat. I deem likely there will be another wave, and soon. Perchance a more able guard should be set. More able, say you? Can you mice not hold a mere watch for a single drift by faith? The rat glared down at Fetcher, the mockery in his tone plain to hear. We be but lowly mice, Fetcher answered meekly as he felt the cold eyes burrowing into the back of his head. The rat snorted. As ever it be. He was then silent for several moments as he weighed the tidings. Be that all, mouse? Yea, naught more, Fetcher swiftly replied. He felt his limbs begin to tremble and fought to keep them steady. Then depart. Yes, the rat ordered. I shall consider, and then see to this matter. Now begone from my sight. Though my comrades be now well sated, tender living flesh ever tempts, by faith. It would be wise for you to keep your distance for a time yet, most of all when I decree an end to the orgy. The rat snarled, as his eyes and fangs vanished into the maw as he withdrew. The warning was not needed, as Fetcher had already turned at depart. With his courage now exhausted, he dashed from the temple's entrance through the burrow back into his home, as if he were being chased by a cat. Silence looked up with wide eyes as he dove into the nest. She padded over to nuzzle his head. He had curled up into a tight ball and continued to tremble. Fetcher looked up, then leaned into her touch and found himself comforted by her nearness. His whiskers then lifted bravely. Well, I swore I'd not tarry long. His voice shook slightly as he spoke, though he was glad to be back in the safety of his home. I have delivered my tale to Captain. He was in no merry mood, but he did listen. Silence's ears flicked, and she offered a soft chirp in answer. She then settled down and rested her head upon his, and there she remained without complaint until his quivering ceased.